from the Chief Judge of the district, and I want to thank all of you for being here as part of our effort to continue our education in areas that we don't often get to in our practice. That I was telling Dr. Moulton, we experience these things, but we don't have a label for it, so we experience it and move on without understanding the significance of what it is that we accept in everyday life. And then suddenly some awareness comes, we're able to change our behavior. The other name for that educational process, in my instance, has been marriage. It's a continuing process, and it even happened this morning as I was leaving. I learned one more thing, and I really like learning other things, other ways to look at life and adjust accordingly. So I hope that we'll be open to that change that always happens, because that's what we want for the people with whom we work. Georgette Leventis, who's been one of our many great acquisitions this year, is going to introduce Dr. Moulton, who we're very glad to have with us. Georgette?
I love a judge who treats every moment as a teaching moment. This is really, I'm looking out here to see who else is here, and this is like the weirdest collision of my worlds possible. So I have my old probation family, my old federal public defender family, my new probation family, and I'm just really honored to be able to do this. I want to thank all of you for coming on behalf of the ARC Standing Committee and also the ARC Training Subcommittee. I'd like to thank Judge Newford for making this possible, and for the other judges who are present, Judge Wells, Judge P. I believe Judge Sam was signed up, but I don't see him yet. Thank you so much for coming. I'm going to, you may have had a chance to read Dr. Moulton's bio that was sent out, but I'm going to read that to you, partly because I could not memorize all of this, and I think it's important that you hear more about him. He's an incredibly interesting, experienced person, and I want you to know a little bit about him. So, Dr. Moulton is a native of Salt Lake and a graduate of West High School. He had a distinguished Navy career as an academic and operational forensic psychiatrist prior to accepting a faculty position at the University of Utah in 2012. Dr. Moulton completed medical school in 2000 at the Uniformed Services University in Bethesda, Maryland, and residency and fellowship training at what is now the Walter Reed National Military Medical Center. From 2007 to 2015, Dr. Moulton had primarily been involved in training psychiatry residents and administering their training programs. In 2015, he returned to school, completing an MBA at the Anderson School of Management in 2017. He's a little bit of an underachiever, as you can see. In addition to his forensic consulting practice, he supervises 2 resident clinics and teaches the resident forensic curriculum. Dr. Moulton currently serves on the Physicians Licensing Board for the state of Utah, a committee which advises DOPL regarding physicians facing probation or termination of their license. And my place. He also serves on 2 committees for the Missionary Department of the LDS Church, screening missionary applicants, and establishing worldwide mental health policy for the young missionaries. Dr. Moulton is a 9/11 first responder, and he served 2 tours in Iraq in 2005 and 2007. He has been married 26 years to his wife, Suzanne, who is a native of Pittsburgh, and they have 4 adult children and 1 teenager. How's that working out?
It's not working out well.
Okay.
He's going to be seeing you shortly, I'm sure.
Please help me in welcoming Dr. David Moulton.
I told my son he's sort of enjoying white privilege and being a minor right now. It may not last. Good morning, or good afternoon, I guess now. So thank you, Georgette. Georgette's been a friend of mine since I came back to Utah in 2012, and we've worked together quite a bit. I've also worked with her sister, who works for the School of Medicine and works with the psychiatry clerkship for the students. And lots of old friends who I've done cases with, and Brad, who I've worked with at the University of Utah for a long time, so I'm very happy to be here. So some of you know a bit about transference and countertransference, and others it might be new terminology for you, but it certainly is not anything new. Once we talk about it, you'll know that you experienced this and what the heck, and you'll now have a name for it. I think there's a remote to overlord. Does it work? No, but that's okay. So transference, what is it we're transferring? So when we talk about transference and countertransference, it's old Freudian terms. Don't check out yet, really. This isn't going to be about Freud. But you're transferring basically feelings from past experiences onto your current situation. And traditionally, it's something that we talked about within the realm of a psychoanalytic relationship, but it's far beyond that. We don't really even do psychoanalysis anymore. Some people do in like DC and New York, but it's very rare that people actually do analysis anymore. And it's been identified that these kind of relationships exist everywhere, including marriage, as the judge mentioned. So traditionally, transference is where the client puts their feelings on the therapist, and countertransference is where the therapist is putting their feelings and experiences on the client, or making assumptions or things like that. But that extends, of course, into all of our relationships, our working relationships, and very much so with our relationships with probationers and valuees and other things that you're dealing with. Okay, then I have to keep on my computer. So this was just a random quote out of a book I was looking at, but it was very general and applicable. We need to be careful not to get caught up in a reenactment where we take on a negative role. The important thing is we maintain the capacity to observe ourselves and reflect on the positions we find ourselves in. So one of the biggest problems when we get in these relationships is if you have someone that is using very kind of immature defense mechanisms like, insulting you, or just being annoying, or passive-aggressive, right? Our natural tendency is to regress and do that exact same thing. The next thing you know, you're like in a situation that reminds you of when you were on a playground in an argument in 6th grade, right? And it's like, why am I behaving like this? And why is this person making me feeling this way? So these relationships that your clients have, or you may have a lot to do with your past and what your relationships in the past have been and what assumptions you're making with the little information you have about somebody to make judgments. So if your interactions growing up or as an adult with the police have been more like the one on the left where someone's rescuing your cat, or one on the right where somebody's macing you, you have very different thoughts about law enforcement, right? And same thing if you grew up in a healthy religious situation, or if you grew up running into one of these guys, you're going to have very different ideas about religion when you're an adult, right? So when you run into people who go to church or are leaders in a church, you might have very kind of preconceived notions of what that means depending on your experiences. Similarly, if your grandma growing up was more like the one on the left or the one on the right, you may have different ideas about elderly people and how elderly people think, or what their attitudes or values may be. And of course, we all know there's a lot written on race and how we make different judgments or different impressions based on people's race. This one was rather interesting. A study in the American Sociological Review. Black youth are more likely to have, so if you have negative behaviors from an African American youth, you're more likely to attribute to that to internal things like their values or their personalities. Whereas white youth are more likely to include negative external attributes like he's a product of his environment, or bad parenting, or things like, or bad friends, or things like that. Black youth have been judged to be, in numerous studies, have been judged to be at higher risk for reoffending than white offenders. And we see that in sentencing, parole, and probation, and all sorts of things. Okay, so transference and countertransference, these deep-seated emotions have a lot to do actually with your parents. And I don't want to get all touchy-feely with you guys, and we're not going to turn this into a therapy session, but it does have a lot to do with parents. So if your relationships with your parents growing up are very different. All of us have unique experiences, but that has a lot to do with how we trust authority in particular, and even at times an entire gender, how you judge them can be based on your relationships with your parents. Okay, so you'll often hear this term, leave your emotions at the door, and you probably find that doesn't really work, and it doesn't. So you actually have to learn to, the idea is that you learn to recognize these emotions and you keep control of them and use them to inform you rather than direct you. Okay, there's a proverb that says that we need to learn to act and not be acted upon, or in other words, we act and we don't react. So we use our emotions as well as this input from the person sitting across the desk from us who may be annoying us, and we use that to help inform our decisions, but not to determine how we respond. Does that make sense? You don't want to be reacting to your situation. So you don't want to sideline your emotions, confront them. And a lot of times we can anticipate a situation we're going into. Sometimes we can't. A lot of times we think we're anticipating it and we're not. Feelings you want to watch out for. So these are things that come up when you're, and again, so when you start feeling this way, you want to learn to reflect on it and say, okay, this is what I'm feeling and why am I feeling this way right now? What is this person doing? What's going on with me today? Am I having a hard time being present? I know a lot of times I have a hard time being present and thinking about what's for dinner or, paying my taxes or all sorts of things when I should be listening. And a lot of times, too, we're dealing with things that have very serious consequences sometimes, and if we're mentally checked out, that's not good, right? I mean, we really need to be paying attention. Okay. So there's sometimes positive emotions that get aroused too, and you want to be somewhat careful of that because you can bias your decisions, and in a therapeutic relationship, it can lead to bad therapy as well. So if you're finding that you overly like someone, or if they're reminding you very favorable of someone you once knew, you might be getting blindsided or even being manipulated, and you might not be aware of that manipulation because some of these manipulative folks are pretty savvy, and they get you sucked in thinking that they're super wonderful and maybe not as dangerous as they really are. Okay, so some things you can ask yourself when this starts arising in you. Again, this takes practice and time. And that's something that I can't really bestow upon you today other than give you some tools and you can work on them. Is this something that is a characteristic feeling for me? Is this a unique feeling? I feel it's a lot. Is this being triggered by something unrelated to the client, like the fact that I have to pay taxes, or I've got a meeting right after this and I need to hustle up? Is it related to a client in an obvious way, like they're being a complete jerk to me, and so, okay, I understand this? Or is it more subtle, and it's like, I don't know why I feel this way, but it may not be related to the client? And is your reaction kind of the normal reaction that you typically have when you kind of feel this way, or is this kind of an uncharacteristic thing? So in general, our emotions can be a very good advisor, but they're really, really bad decision makers. Okay, so we want to use our mature part of our brain, that higher cognitive functioning, to help us make decisions. And we can use our emotions to help guide our decision making, but you don't ever want to let your emotions make the decision for you. Sure, we've all done that and realized it was a really bad idea. So, we want to not do that. Okay, this is a famous saying we have in the military. So you got this plan, you know it's going to be tough. You go in there and you're like, this is what I'm going to do, and then something you don't expect happens, right? So, and then it's like you got to start hunting from there and sort of making things up or trying to use your skills that you've learned from this class today. Okay, so something I constantly remind myself. Okay, so you can't expect your clients to be the grown-up. You have to be the grown-up. And that can be challenging because they can be rather difficult, but it's your job as a professional to be the grown-up in the room. All right, so I heard this story a bit ago, and it got me thinking with regards to this talk. So all of us, in some capacity, have power over somebody else. We carry the bullwhip. And we got to be very careful with that bullwhip. And we want to make sure that we're using it after rational decisions are made and not using it as, out of anger or out of frustration or out of something driven by our emotions. Okay? And that's a big responsibility society has entrusted us with, because we give recommendations or make decisions with really important things. And we can really wound somebody for the wrong reasons if we're acting out of anger or frustration, or just because we got bored, or because we're in a hurry, or we're hungry, or lots of other things that come up sometimes, pressures of our schedule, all sorts of things. So we have to be super cautious and cognizant of that. Okay, so this is the million-dollar question, of course, right? What triggers you? Okay, so you want to know your body, too. Like, if you... this is something that it takes some practice, but kind of check it in with your body every now and then to see what you're experiencing. Am I getting short of breath? Is my jaw clenching? Am I breathing more shallow? Am I tensing up in my neck? You know, these kinds of changes occur in your body when you start feeling certain emotions, and sometimes we don't really recognize it. When I was in my late 20s, I used to have this jaw pain, and I couldn't really figure out what was causing it. And I went and saw some TMJ specialist, and he's like, "You clench your jaw." And I was like, "I do? I had no idea I clenched my jaw." And I overcame that simply by checking in with my body on a regular basis and saying, "Am I clenching my jaw right now?" Usually when I was getting lectured by my wife, but I learned to not do that by checking in, and now it doesn't happen anymore, and consciously it's just gone away. But for a long time I had to kind of check in on a regular basis and say, "Here, what's going on here?" Okay? If you can't figure out what kind of changes your body goes through when you're stressed, you could ask somebody that you know who lives with you or works with you quite a bit, and they'll be able to tell you what happens with your body when you get stressed out because they've observed it. Okay? So just being aware of those changes can help. Okay, you also want to take inventory on your body and ask them when you start getting stressed out and wonder if there's any of like just the basic functionings that your body needs physiologically are going on that may be creating some of the anxiety or the fatigue or frustration that you may be experiencing. This is a rather disturbing study here. So in this study, extraneous factors in judicial decisions. Is the judge here?
Yep. Still here.
I hope you were part of this study. So this was actually done in Israel, so not us, fortunately. But what is going on here is this is the proportional rulings in favor of prisoners looking for parole by the order of position in which they were scheduled during the day. So basically, these judges which they studied in Israel gave rather favorable rulings in the morning, and then as they got closer to the time for the first break, the decisions started getting worse and worse. And then after their break, they got more favorable again, and then after the lunch hour, they got more favorable again. And it's kind of scary that where you are in the schedule for the day could have a lot to do with how things are going to go for you that day. Kind of frightening. Now they even corrected this with how many months they had been serving, and whether they had previous incarcerations or no previous incarcerations, and the exact same pattern occurs. So it's not like they're scheduling more serious offenders later in the day, or people who've been in longer or in a shorter time, different times of the day. It was just totally dependent on whether or not the judge needed a bathroom break and a meal. So, we want to make sure this isn't happening to us. Okay, this is something that I want to talk a lot about. I'm actually involved in a case right now, working with on a state case on the defense team, where the sentencing guidelines came back really rather different than, the recommendation was really rather different than the guidelines. And this might be a part where we can interact a little bit and see what your experience is with this. But I am very, very cautious. So I use instruments that do dangerousness assessments. So I'm asked to do dangerous assessments a lot. And there's some questions on there. I don't know if you guys know what the VRAG is, the Violence Risk Appraisal Guide. So I use this. This is one of the best actuarial assessments out there for determining risk. Now, psychiatrists historically have a very checkered past with doing risk assessments. They tend to be pretty unreliable, not data-driven. So I use a very data-driven assessment because I don't necessarily trust my instincts to do a good job. And if you look at this on these questions here, questions 8 and 9, there's a couple things that are rather counterintuitive, that rather annoy me when I use this instrument, because I sometimes evaluate someone who has no victim involved in their crime, yet they get higher points for their future risk based on not having a victim than if they killed somebody. Now that doesn't make any sense. But actuarially speaking, for whatever reason, that's what happens. That's what the data says works out that way. And so I let it go. I use the data. I put a little paragraph in there and say, I know this doesn't seem to make sense, but actuarially speaking, this is what happens. And if you similarly, if the victim's a female, apparently you have a less future risk of dangerousness than if it wasn't a female victim or no victim. I don't understand it, but that's what the data says. And so I think sometimes in making sentencing guidelines, you might be tempted to go with your gut rather than what the data says. And we call that judgment, or we call that intuition, or we call that experience. But all those things have high potential of being riddled with bias, right? What your experiences have been, not just in the workplace, but growing up, your childhood, where you go to church if you go to church, all kinds of those things, the neighborhood you live in, all influence your so-called judgment, right? And it may be incorrect based on your biases, which we all have. Found it interesting. I was one of the older people in the MBA class, or my MBA class that I just did. Most of the class was in their mid-30s, and there was 2 people in their 50s and 2 of us approaching our 50s. And one of the first, they were talking about women and race in the MBA program, and they said, how many of you struggle with issues of racism? And I noticed only the older people raised their hands. And I don't think it's the fact that we're more racist. I think we're more experienced to know that we have these biases, and we don't ignore them and pretend they're not there. We come to recognize that they exist, to accept it as it's something we deal with that probably isn't going to go away. And again, rather than denying it, we manage it. And we say, okay, I know I'm prone to think this way, and I need to reconsider that. And so I guess my advice is, if you're going against sentencing guidelines that are established by data, right, you want to be very careful and ask yourself, why am I doing this? It may be the right thing. It may be the right thing. But you really need to give it really close scrutiny and question yourself, and not just go with your gut that says, I've been doing this a long time, I know what I'm doing. Okay? Does that make sense? And it's hard, because you don't want to admit that you're racist, or a sexist, or an elitist, or whatever. But we all have these biases, and we bring it in with us. Okay? All right. Any thoughts? Any experiences? Anyone wants to share? Because you guys are going to have a long break. We're going to have some sharing time. Anyone? No one? No one. At least not on your phones yet. Please, go ahead.
So, this is more of a practical question, but
You want the mic?
No.
Okay.
I have a loud voice. It touches on your comment that if you're going to deviate from guidelines, you should you should ask yourself why. But that kind of assumes that the guidelines themselves are based on reliable data. Where do we, or those of us who are practitioners, go to kind of get a gauge on how valid the guidelines are to start with?
I think that's a reasonable question for sure. And I don't know specifically, because I don't know what instruments you're using per se, because that's not my specialty. But I think it's worthwhile that you know what the data is. I think if you want to be an educated consumer of the assessments you're using and the guidelines that you're using, because I agree, that can be problematic, because crap data in, crap data out, right? In fact, Let me see if I got this slide handy. Yes. So this segues in kind of the next thought is AI going to help us? And I think it will eventually, but we may not be there yet. Okay? And this addresses your problem now, because we have typically not a very diverse group of people that program, right? You know, there's not a lot of women programmers. That's something they're struggling with. Not a lot of people of color in tech. That's something they're struggling with. So people that are writing these programs are typically rich, elite men, right? Often white or Indian descent, not Hispanic, not African American. And so you have these folks programming the AI, and they're finding, guess what? The AI makes racist judgments because it's getting programmed by a rich, elite, white male. So you run into problems. So I think eventually we will get there, but we're not there yet. To your point, though, there's something else, another tool at your guys' disposal, and that's peer review and colleagues. And to what extent you have the ability and time to do that, I would strongly encourage you to do that. So in medicine, we kind of have a rule that if you're ever dealing with anything really sticky, you get as many people's names in the chart as possible. Because if you're all kind of on board that what you're doing makes sense, then it's less likely that it's a bad idea. It's also less likely you're going to get sued because you've got more people looking at it. But it's also a better idea. It also helps make better decisions. Now, one thing we know for sure about decision-making among groups is that you need a diverse group, right? This is the problem with governance in corporate boards, corporate boards is made up of rich, white, elite men who all make the same decision, and so it doesn't give a lot of diversity to the decision to make a good decision. And for me, that's what diversity on corporate boards is all about. Representation is important, but what's even more important is that you have a good decision made, and to do that, you need a diverse group of thoughts. Okay? So, if you are getting peer review, don't go to your buddy that you know is going to validate what you think, right? Or even maybe just validate it because they're your friend without even listening to you. Go to someone who may disagree with you and defend your position and say, this is why I want to do it this way, and be prepared for them to say, yeah, but why? And I wouldn't do it that way, I'd do it this way, and listen to them. You may make the same conclusion, but you want a challenge. You don't want to just go with somebody that agrees with you, if that makes sense. Okay, so I don't know specifically on that data, because it's not really my data set, but within my profession, I look at the original studies, see what kind of numbers they had, what kind of statistical variation, all kinds of stuff like that, so I can know how decent the data is. And same thing when we read medical literature, we always look at what's your p-value and how many people are involved, this is a crap study, who funded the study, all sorts of things, whether or not you should buy into it or not. Okay, other questions, thoughts? Right. At least you're looking at me. I'm used to teaching residents who are usually on their computer and writing notes while I'm trying to talk. Super annoying. Okay, so this is a practice as far as the transference countertransference. It's something you can get better with time, and I think it's very important as professionals that we are always trying to better ourselves and improve ourselves. Lifelong learning is what it's all about. So there's a few things you can do. So one thing that's very important is that you allow your brain time to process. Okay, be that on your drive home or just 10 minutes where you shut the door and think. Okay, but we all need some quiet time to kind of get off the treadmill and just let the mind process a little bit about what happened. Okay, the commute home is good with that if you want to turn off the radio and just kind of think for a few minutes. The other thing that is helpful, particularly if you're working with difficult cases, is to journal a little bit. And you can review some of those over time to see if your decisions are consistent or inconsistent, if you're improving or you're becoming more cynical as you get on, with your career, and be kind of a check of how your mental health is doing as you go throughout your career, because there can be a tendency to get burned out and bitter and think the world is a cruel place. I remember, so before my first deployment to Iraq, my experience with the Marine Corps was Marines sitting in my office, and I would in a psychiatric office. And once I deployed, I realized, wow, all these Marines are like seriously high-functioning people. They're not just all a bunch of like crazy people who marry borderlines. Some of them are actually pretty normal. So that can be tough when you're in what you do all day, every day, and you don't get a break, to where you get very, very cynical about the world. And so journaling can kind of help you gauge where you're at and make sure you're not getting more cynical over time. Okay, we talked about collaboration. Okay. So when you're kind of reflecting, and this is maybe something you can, I don't know, look at sometime if you really want to see when you're walking through this for the first few times. What lessons can I draw out of this experience? I mean, that's really the bottom line. In how can I do better next time? What information that I wish I had in this situation that I didn't have, that I maybe could have gotten? What kind of preparation could I do to maybe come in a little better prepared emotionally for what I was about to go through and experience? And here's the key: is what opportunity I have to slow things down that I didn't take. Now this is when you get in situations where things get kind of agitated a little bit. Sometimes the best thing you can do is take a break, and it's usually better if you initiate the break and make up some excuse why you need a break, rather than going, "You look agitated, I'm going to leave and give you a break." You know, just you can just say, "You know what? I got to make a quick phone call, right?" And then just step out, catch your breath, kind of process. Okay. I know some of this may be luck, and I don't want to jinx myself, but so I've been doing my psychiatry job for about 20 years, and I've worked with some pretty scary, dangerous people, and I have never gotten hit, and that's like unheard of. You know, I had this one colleague who used to get hit all the time because he used to like go in and round on agitated people at 5 in the morning because he wanted to get out riding his bike, and he's like, "I get hit a lot." And I'm like, "Yes, you do. You have to explain to me why you get hit a lot." You know this guy. In fact, one of our social workers at uni was working with this doc, and this doc got hit again. He says, "Man, I get hit a lot." And he's like, he says, the social worker says to the doc, he says, like, "You know, I've been doing this job 27 years, and I've only been hit once, and you provoked him." But anyway, I think why I don't get hit is because I get up and walk out when I see the person getting upset. And I don't wait till they're really upset. I leave when they're just a little bit upset. And just give everybody a little breathing room to calm down, collect ourselves, and then come back at it a little bit refreshed. Georgette?
Yeah, can you walk through, so short of leaving the room, which I also use regularly.
Right.
What other strategies when you're in the moment and you feel, you're checking with your body, like you said, you feel your heart rate increasing, you know you're getting frustrated or angry. In the moment, what strategies can you use?
So we're not to the violence point yet. We're just at the frustration part, right?
Yeah.
So first you want to see, is this just you or is it them as well? Are they having that same kind of thing? Okay. So if it's them, you might be able to ask them what they're experiencing right now, right? Like, this must be difficult for you to talk about, or this can be very frustrating. Sometimes I offer to talk about something else for a while. I'm going to change gears for a bit. probably need to come, we may need to come back to that later, but maybe if we change gears for a bit, feel better. Sometimes you can, if you're dealing with somebody that can handle it, you can tell them. You can say, I don't know, it seems like you are upset with me. Are you upset with me? You can ask them about it. Did I do something to anger you? How can I help? Right? Questions like that, along those lines. Trying to think of other examples for you.
So if it's a judge, hypothetically, that's very upset with us, we could offer them a snack, perhaps.
Well, the judge may need his bathroom break, as you can see from that prior study. Yeah, I think now you guys, if you're ever at the end of the docket, you're going to ask for a reskin if you're late in the day.
You just gave us a due process.
We're going to start tracking requests for reschedules at the end of the day. Yeah, so it's defusing the situation, right? Sometimes you can make a light comment. Sometimes they don't appreciate that. I think too, if you just kind of identify it, it's really palpable, and just say, I don't know, I'm feeling a little bit stressed right now. Is that what you're feeling? And what do you think is causing that? Right? Some of it just kind of have to gauge the kind of maturity level of the person you're dealing with. If they're super mature, and that's a skill too. For those of you that have kids or have dealt with kids, a lot of your clients are in some stage of arrested development. And if you can kind of figure out what stage that is, then it can kind of help you meet them where they're at. Because I think a lot of this frustration comes when we try to expect our clients to meet us at a level they're just not at. And it's not going to happen, right? If they have arrested development at 12 to 14, there's no way you're going to have an adult conversation with them. It's just not going to happen. No matter how much you might wish it, it's not going to happen, right? So just give up that fantasy. Don't get mad at them because they can't speak to you at that level, and realize this is just where they are. I hope that helps. Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about mindfulness. So mindfulness is, I don't want to lose y'all, this psychotherapeutic mumbo jumbo. I knew I couldn't come in here and tell you the best way to kind of get on top of your transference and countertransference is to go to therapy, right? Because you guys would all just like, I'm out of here. But it really is one of the best ways to understand your issues is to go to therapy and talk about it. And figure out what it is that gets under your skin and why, right? And help you learn to deal with that. But mindfulness is an exercise. It's sort of just like meditation, but not so much. It's sort of like processing, but a little more. That will help us to kind of come to terms with some of what we're feeling and being able to check with our body and be able to check in with our thoughts. The key to mindfulness is being able to sit and just be quiet, and what you want to do is observe your thoughts and not try to direct them, and just kind of let them go by. It's sort of like you're sitting on the corner here watching the traffic, right? And just like your thoughts are the traffic, okay? So you're not going to try to jump in front of the traffic. You're not going to stop the traffic unless you want to get arrested or run over. You're just going to sit there and watch it and let it go by. No judgment, and that's the other key. Is you don't judge the thoughts. You just let them go. If you're angry about something, you let that thought go. You don't want to stop it and say, well, I shouldn't be angry about that. No, just let it go. Okay? Just let it go by, just like all your thoughts. And then you will start to be able to get a little bit of appraisal of the types of thoughts you're having, okay, to where you can then kind of process what you're feeling and then come to the why. And rather than trying to stop it, and just to understand why you're having it and say, okay, this is why I'm experiencing that. So it's a process that you do without judgment. So this is a typical mindfulness kind of exercise. There's a lot of these that there's apps for the phone you can get and things like that. There's one called Headspace that's super good. I don't make money by Headspace, so. But it's good. I think they're kind of overpriced. I took the free lectures most of them like 17 times. It's good enough for me. I think it's fine. But it's essentially a 10-minute exercise. You just sit somewhere quiet. You can sit in a chair, you can lay down, whatever. Basically, you want to be somewhere you don't be bothered. Concentrate on your breath. You kind of scan your body. So this, again, is coming to terms with what sensations your body's having, what you're experiencing. And then you kind of isolate your senses. So you think about what you hear, think about what you see, and then you try to combine the senses where you're like, okay, just kind of take it all in. What are the kind of thoughts from the mind? And then you observe your thoughts. And it's hard. When you first start doing stuff like this, it's like, man, this is like, I got shit to do. Right? I can't like sit every 10 minutes. And I think it's not just about being busy. I think that's a very uncomfortable feeling for most of us. Just sitting and trying not to do something, right? To just let your mind go and just let the thoughts go by without trying to intervene. Okay?
David?
Yes?
The Federal Judicial Center, if you just Google mindfulness and judging, there's a resource page that will come up on or off the DCN that has a lot of resources, including videos, a link to Headspace. So there's a lot of material there.
Wow. Okay, so this is an endorsement. Wonderful. And it really is important. I know it seems, when you start doing it, it seems very awkward and weird. But it's helpful. Mindfulness is a big part of yoga. It's a big part of martial arts. So it's not like we invented it. In fact, it's sort of interesting because I thought about this a lot. I'm a PTSD guy, obviously, because I've had 2 deployments and worked with the Marine Corps. But the samurai were actually quite good at managing their PTSD type crap, right? Because they had a lot of meditation and mindfulness in their practice as samurais. And I've always tried to explain to the Marine Corps or the Navy, who's the mental health care that takes care of them, if they just moved all their PTSD treatments from the clinic to the gym, they would have so much more success treating Marines. Because Marines are not going to come to the clinic unless their boss is dragging them, kicking and screaming, but they're at the gym. They're already there, right? And if you just incorporate it in part of their workout and part of their what they're doing anyway, you'd be so much more successful. All right. So, I don't know if you guys want to talk about more about how to practice mindfulness. I have left a lot of room for Q&A. This might be where we have a little break. And then what I'd like to do is hear some difficult cases amongst your peers and colleagues that you can discuss, and then we can discuss them out loud and get some thoughts about what you're experiencing, in part to hopefully gain some experience and knowledge, but in part also to help you being able to voice your frustrations and not keep them private and quiet, and because you're all having them, I'm sure. And I think there's a lot more similarities to these frustrations than you might think. So let's have a break, and then we'll do that. All right? Portion of the program. I don't know if you saw the last thing on the screen, but it said end slideshow. The slides are over. So we're going to talk as long as you guys want to talk, and then you'll go back to work, I guess. Bob,
yes.
Thank you. Hello, sir.
So we have a lot of reentry rules in this court.
Yes.
And we work with participants for a long time. And we work with them informally, and we work with them in some social situations. And we're dealing with them on a different level than we've been trained to deal with clients. And all this from whatever perspective. When we reach the point that a person is going to be kicked out of court, there's an explosion of emotion. All different kinds of things. I mean, there's intense sadness, there's anger, there's frustration, within. I get frustrated about what I did or didn't do. We get angry that they lied to us. Imagine a drug addict lying to us. Right? We get, and it's a team with all these different emotions because we all have different experiences. How do we start to sort through that and deal with that? It's not just the one-on-one, it's the whole.
Right. Perfect. That should take us about 3 hours to dissect all of that. Okay. So here's the difficult position you've been placed in. What is your role? What is your role in this situation with those people in your energy program?
Well, we're a collaborative team, and,
What-
and
okay,
I'm the
well, what's-
defense attorney.
Okay. You're sort of a defense attorney.
Right.
You're a defense attorney, but you're a peer maybe in their minds, right? You're a friend maybe in their minds. Are you a parent in their minds? Maybe. Okay. And some of those relationships get pretty tricky, right? Because we're violating boundaries we ordinarily want to keep. But I understand the nature of the program. The nature of the program is to help these folks have a different kind of judicial experience where, you know, it's not all bad and stressful and people aren't lowering the hammer. But you're still hanging out of that bullwhip. You just got it hidden under your coat. You don't have it out, right? So, but it's still there, right? And that's something that you can't forget in these situations. And I think that's what's hard, is to get to know these folks on a personal level and exposing and a little bit of your own personal life, right? About who you are outside of this role as a defense attorney, that you go home after the end of the day and put on a pair of jeans and put your feet up and have a family, right? And so it's tricky. And you want to make sure it is something you need to be active and mindful of in your interactions there, that you make sure that they know that what your position is solely, and you're showing them other parts of your character without changing the nature of the relationship. If that makes sense. So that you can be the defense attorney who goes to a picnic, who cares about their family, who has a family, right? But you're still the defense attorney. You don't become the friend, okay? You can be a friendly defense attorney, but you're not their friend, right? And that is the key there, is to help them understand that. And it can be difficult. I guess what comes to mind more than anything is if you think of that role as a parent, right? As your kids get a little older, you start having more of a friendship with them. But if you become too much of a friend too soon, then you're going to regret it. And they're not going to do as well, because they need the firm hand sometimes, right? And that's what happens when you've got a parent that's always been a friend and never been a parent. You get a disaster, right? And so in many ways, the folks you're dealing with, you're dealing with arrested development in a lot of ways. So it's not too dissimilar from parenting. And you know, if you're trying to figure out what that relationship is, if it's not a defense attorney relationship, that might be the most analogous one to kind of think of, right? Is one of more of a parent, where you're mentoring, you're advising, you're encouraging, you're coaching, but you're not a peer, and you don't want to be a peer, okay? And sometimes that needs to be reminded throughout the course of the relationship in order so they don't get confused, right? Because that's the hardest part, is when they come to see you as a friend and not someone that has a responsibility to the community and a book of guidelines you've got to follow, and suddenly they violate those, and suddenly they're like, whoa, what's going on here? I thought we were buddies, right? And I think that's the key, is to let them see those sides of you, right? Because in reality, I think that's maybe what the experience is about. If you want them to have a friendlier experience with the judicial system, right? I don't think it's so much of you showing them that you're not really a defense attorney, right? You want to show them that you're a defense attorney who has these other sides of your personality, that you're not all business all the time, but still maintaining it clear in their conscience what your role is, right? And that things could get hard, and maybe a reminder of that throughout the relationship, even when things are going well, to say, I really had a good time at the picnic, and I hope you're doing well, because I'm enjoying the relationship that we're having. And if you're not doing well, our relationship the nature of our relationship's got to go back the way it was, and because that's my primary duty to the public.
So, and that's addressing the way they're approaching us.
Right.
And I feel like, that puts us at risk because they're approaching the but then there's also the problem of I'm getting angry about my decision, or about, at least responding emotionally, probably because I've put a lot of effort into this relationship. Do you just try and work on that all the time? Do you watch it come up?
Yeah, so I would say a few things to that, because you can't help but get emotionally attached to these people. You're hanging around with them, you learn about their lives, and you become very empathic towards their situation, and even at times sympathetic, which is there's nuances to the differences of what that means, but empathy is more of an understanding of where they are, and sympathy is kind of feeling sorry for them, and you're going to have a little bit of both of that, right? And it can be hard, just like our wayward teenagers are hard, right? They cause us a lot of pain, and I think it's the nature of the job that you need to be kind of wired for that. But when it comes to the decision making, that's the tough part. I think really the core of your question is how are you guiding your decisions? And again, I would think that this is a really important place for some collegial input in your decision making with someone that's a little more distant from the situation. And we run into that in psychiatry as well. You work with somebody in therapy for a while, and you start to, get over-invested in their well-being more than you should be, and then when they screw up, it ruins your day, and then you're upset, and then you may be tempted to call them and tell them what to do, which a therapist is not supposed to do that, and say, "Why are you doing that, you idiot?" Which is what I tell my kids, but it doesn't really work with a client very well. So I would think that'd be a good spot for some collegial input, for someone that's emotionally removed from the situation, to see if your decision-making capacities getting involved. The other thing, too, that sometimes the consequence for their actions is not punishment, it's corrective. And I think that is maybe a reframing that can be important. That if sometimes people need to be in an environment where they can get control of themselves, and it's not necessarily a failure, it's just kind of where they are in their progress, or where the disease has taken them. And I think that's maybe a key with the substance use issues, that you need to constantly remind yourself, is this is a disease that takes control, okay? When people are hooked, their agency is surrendered. And their decision-making capacity isn't there. So I think that can help meet it a little bit, is this disease, rather than saying, you screwed up, this disease has really got you, and this is what's next, unfortunately. And it hurts me and it hurts you, but this is where it has taken you. And that way you're not personalizing on this individual hurting you, or letting you down, or letting themselves down. And it's something that's not, tangible. Not tangible in the sense of being another human connection, a disease process. And sometimes that's what's needed. And that's what's hard, is because when you guys have people in your program, the idea is to get them back in the community and not to have them in confinement or back in rehab or somewhere else. But that's, if you do that prematurely, it doesn't help anybody. You know, and we're working together on a case with someone who's really, really mentally ill right now. And the ultimate goal is to reunify this person with their daughter, right? But if that's our sole goal, we could put the daughter at risk. Because our real goal is to have this person be well, and that's not something we're entirely in control of, nor are they. It's where the disease takes them, and we don't know where the disease will take them necessarily. Yes?
The other part of Bob's question was...
He had a lot of his questions, so
yeah,
I know that's a small part of it.
was in part...
Sorry, that's me, right? Oh, you go.
I don't want to be I do both.
Maybe what we can do as team members to process through those emotions that he described, whether it's disappointment, sadness, anger, frustration, as a team. Certainly we can go through the mindfulness checking
Right, sure.
You know, for ourselves, whether it's at the end of the day or even taking a few minutes, just doing a quick check-in if we're in a session. But is there something that we could do that would improve us as a treatment team?
Well, what would that look like for your treatment team to sit down and have that conversation? To talk about emotions and feelings? Is that too weird, or is that...
I don't think so.
No,
I
is
don't
that
know
okay?
what other people would think, but I'm just wondering if there's some check-in questions that you... I mean, maybe they're just that kind of that mindfulness list that we could use in those moments, because I think it is hard to work with this clientele, and it is hard to have them make choices that we wouldn't have them make if we were making decisions for them, obviously.
Right.
But I think that it's helpful for us to think through how we're all working in that context.
Right.
And how to process them as a group, not just as individuals. And I don't know, maybe that's not possible. I don't.
No, the key is that you do process it. You should process it as a group. And it's not that complicated. You just have to make it happen. And we do this a lot of times if there's because we work at a collaborative team approach as well, and particularly in inpatient services in psychiatry, and if anything ever really bad happens, we sit down and have a powwow about it. And not just about talk what happened and start pointing fingers. That's not the point of it. The point of it is to talk about the emotions and the feelings that you had, particularly if we have a suicide. I had someone that I've had several of my former patients commit suicide. I, on purpose, don't read the obituaries. Some of our social workers do. We check them every day, and they're like, oh my gosh, did you hear so-and-so died? I can't do that. I just can't do it. I gotta treat them and treat them. That's what I gotta do to be able to do my job and not, go berserk, right? Because these people have very, very advanced illnesses that I am not going to cure. I'm going to manage. I'm going to get them back on track, and they're most likely going to be back in a couple of weeks. That's just the way it is. But when we have a really bad outcome, and I was particularly close to this individual. This is an individual who, by the name of Travis Twiggs, he was a tracker in Iraq, had 4 deployments under his belt, was an outstanding Marine, and got really, really bad PTSD. And the Marine Corps kind of turned their back on him. They tend to eat their young. That's kind of what they do. My analogy is that if a truck breaks down in the Army, you send a team out to pick up the truck, and they bring it back in and put it in stage 5 rehabilitation for 6 months and put the truck back on the road. In the Marines, if your truck breaks down, you blow it up. And they treat their personnel the same way, unfortunately. But I knew Travis really well, and he was in the Wounded Warrior Battalion at Bethesda, and he was sick, and he was high risk, and we knew that. And he had a messy family to boot, as a lot of the kinds these guys with PTSD, that's a big risk factor, coming from a traumatic background. Probably shouldn't have served his last 2 deployments, but he did because he volunteered, because having hypervigilance when you're getting shot at is normal. When you're here, it's not. Anyway, so it was about a week after he had gone to some presidential thing. He was on national news hugging the President of the United States. And one of his military commanders just pushed one too many buttons, and he rounded up his drug addict brother, and they went on a Thelma and Louise mission and drove off the Grand Canyon. And it was a big deal. But it touched all of us because there was probably 20 or 30 of us that had interactions with him. And so what you do in that situation, and why I'm getting back to this, not a complete diversion from your question, is we sit down and we talk about what we're feeling and why, right? That this was somebody that was important to us, that meant a lot to us, somebody that we grew to love, honestly. We loved him. But we knew he was high risk. And that's something you constantly have to remind yourself, is this person is high risk. And this person, their disease may do something that's going to wound me. And I need to be prepared for that. And to keep that guard up and never trick yourself into thinking they're just fine, because they're not just fine. They're high risk. But then to sit down and process that with the group and say, it's okay to say, I grew to love this person and this really hurts me, or that really makes me angry, or why did this happen? We thought everything was doing so well, did we screw up, right? And just taking that time and being able to have that meeting and discussion without judgment, without pointing fingers, without blame, or looking even for cause, of just, sitting in the moment and talking about what you're experiencing right now can be tremendously beneficial. It's a long answer to your question.
That's a great answer. Wow. That's really great, for even inside the office, too. So one of the personality types, I'm the federal defender, and I sign your checks.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
One of the personality types that our lawyers seem to have the most trouble with when it comes to clients is the narcissistic, manipulative personality. We have a lot of that, and we just have real trouble with the lawyers managing that relationship with the client, and a lot of times they fire us like 5 or 6 times, and we have to deal with it. But I just wonder if that's such a type of personality. Is there a special way to not have them crawl up inside your skin and make you nuts? Is there a way that you as therapists deal with that personality type?
It's all about feeding the ego.
Right.
That's number one principle, right? And so, in as much as you can stomach it, you want to make yourself working for them, right? And advising them, right? Making them kind of feel like they're sort of in charge, even though putting them in charge would be a terrible idea, right? And it can be tricky. And they may want to fire you, and sometimes you have to let them fire you, right? And just being matter of fact with them and say, look, I want to help you. This is the way I know how. If this isn't working for you, then you may need to go somewhere else, or our relationship isn't going to go well, and if it doesn't go well, it may not go well for you in court, right? It is hard. I'm not saying it's easy. These are very challenging folks to work with. So I tell you, for narcissistic personality disorder, what they typically come into therapy for is crisis management, and they never want to get better, right? They don't think there's anything wrong with them, right? So the best you do is you shore up their immature defenses, right? That faults you. First thing I want to mention is when I first started doing psychiatry, this was the most annoying population for me, was the narcissists. When I finally realized in my first 6 weeks of doing this job that narcissism isn't about confidence, it's about extreme fragility, right? And once I realized that, I had a lot better time with these folks because I realized just how fragile they are, right? And that you have to kind of shore them up with the only defenses they're going to work with, which are immature defenses, and kind of glue it back together the best you can. And that includes a lot of validation, shoring it up, propping them up, even though it's like so annoying and is a bitter pill going down. Because there's really nothing else to do for them. Now, that doesn't mean you're a doormat either, right? I mean, you need to set those boundaries and say, this is a line you cannot cross. And once you cross it, I'm not going to work with you anymore. Okay? So, I don't know if I have a better answer.
That was great. Thanks.
That was something. It's a start. Yes.
Can I kind of follow up to Council's
Sure.
question? So, I am a federal defender, and most of my clients are white collar, multi-million-dollar fraud people, practices. But a recurring theme with every single one of them is their obsession of whether or not I know the answer.
That's because you're in Utah.
But how do I deal with that with them? Because when they ask me, I really don't think it matters to them, but it keeps coming up. And then the other thing,
You could lie to them or tell them whatever they want. I'm kidding. Not encouraging you to lie. Do you ask them why that's important to them?
I already did get baptized. It wasn't my choice. I was 8.
Tell them you're President Nelson's friend.
The thing that drives me nuts is so they lie to people to get all of this money, but then their big concern is their honesty and their reputation. How do I
Process your frustration and anger with that?
I get so angry about it.
Well, so I would say because I find it amusing, but I can understand that you wouldn't find it amusing. And that, I think, that is part of your evolution, right? Is getting from anger to amusement over these situations about how ridiculously ironic this is, that this person sitting in your office for fraud wants to know that if you've been saved or not. So, you want to learn to handle your emotions, or you want to learn how to confront them about it? Well, I would say confronting them may or may not be successful, but what I often will say, why is that important to you? Or I will tell them it's not relevant or not important. Now, I am LDS. I tell you, this is very personal, but we wear these weird religious undergarments. And I modify mine a little bit so that no one can see them because they judge me differently than they can see them. And I've never had to do that outside of Utah. But when you're up on the psych ward, you remember the picture of the scary bad religious people I put up. A lot of people have had negative experiences with the LDS Church in Utah. And for my population, a lot of them have had that experience. They've been judged, they've been marginalized. And so when they see someone who they identify as a Latter-day Saint, relationship is up a little bit. Thanks. I also talk like a sailor, so they never see. Because I am a sailor. Now, so as far as your frustration, that again might be something you want to look at. I don't know what your religious experience is. We don't need to talk about this today unless you really want to for my colleague.
I know you're going to tell me therapy.
So it may not, you may be able to handle it on your own, right? But just think it through and think, what types of experiences have I had with rich, influential, dominant, authoritative Mormons? And is that shaping my annoyance with this client? So I think that's the first addressing to it, okay? Now working through that again, because I find that I used to find those people annoying, and now I just find it completely ironic and amusing, right? But that takes time, and it takes you pondering why you're having that reaction, not just like because they're annoying, but a little more in depth to that, and what types of experiences maybe you have had that causes that reaction to be so visceral rather than amusing. That make sense? Yeah. Okay, we'll leave the rest for you.
Just tell me you have 5 children under 4. No, so you're repopulating there.
Okay. Please.
My job is I'm the receptionist desk in probation. And we try. And we a lot of offenders come in. And there's one particular that seems like instantly and I can't just, or if somebody gets really angry at me or whatever, I can't just I am in the face, I want to make them feel like I want them to any suggestions how you reframe or what do you do in this situation?
Yeah, have you been doing this job a long time?
6 months.
Okay. All right. So this again, this is where I think doing those mindfulness exercises is going to be really helpful for you. Okay, to where when you have an experience like that, okay, that you get through, man, you can't walk away while they're there, right? But you might need to get with some of your colleagues who could cover for you for a few minutes while you take a break and kind of collect yourself, okay? Okay, and then just get somewhere a little bit quiet and try to do some deep breathing, okay? And just kind of let those thoughts kind of pass, okay? And what you, without judging, you want to be able to observe those thoughts, but then put it in context of that this is tying to something not today, this is tying to something in the past, okay? And that we want to be present, right? And try to not go to the past. And so some of those techniques of the early, that's what that's about in those early mindfulness, where you're going through your senses and focusing on your breath. Okay, that's the point of that, is not just only to check in with your body, but also to help you maintain being present. Okay, because that's what's happening there is you're not being present. You're going to the past, but this past you're not going to.
But I know I've done something that's triggered it, and so it's very so.
Like their charges, or like in your interaction with them?
And so I think I remember. So how do you be mindful of that and just say it isn't? You know what I'm saying?
Right, I think so. So again, maintaining that presence and then trying to sort out, okay? Now, some of these people have done really terrible things, right? But probably not toward the receptionist in the Utah Federal Defender's Office, fortunately. Maybe, you never know, right? And you know, you want to maintain safety and all that. You don't want to invite them over for dinner if it's been super dangerous. But I really try to put those cognitive tools on top of that, right? So this person has done something terrible, but why would they do that toward me, right? I'm here, I'm trying to help them, I'm trying to be helpful, right? I'm not doing anything to try to provoke them or make them angry. They don't know where I live. The odds of them coming after me are slim to none, right? This is kind of how I got to Iraq. I was mostly on the base the whole time, and yes, somebody got blown up once a week by mortar flying over the fence, but there was 10,000 of us there. So what are the odds of that mortar's going to hit me on any given day? I mean, they're there. That risk is probably there. Don't get me wrong, but it's still 1 in 10,000 that day. And this is sort of how you just have to kind of manage through this kind of stuff. The other thing that I have learned over time, and I don't know if this will help you much, because I don't know how in depth you get to know these people, and maybe you don't, but just if you took this general principle that I've learned from my experience, that I think all of you know, is that nobody's as bad as their best day, or nobody's as bad as their worst day, right? Right? And now that doesn't mean that you let your guard down and don't protect yourself, because you do know what they're capable of, right? Okay, but that doesn't mean there isn't goodness in them, and I think it can be very easy and very quick to look at something heinous somebody has done and think they're a monster. And as you get to know them, you realize they're not a monster. Fortunately, none of us are really monsters, and the ones that are, they're really, really rare, right? True psychopathy is very rare, thank goodness, right? Thank goodness. But it's really rare. And most of the folks we see who have committed homicides have a lot going on and a lot of good qualities to them, even the worst of the worst. And if we can focus on those, right, and even if you don't know them well, just that principle, that even the worst thing this person's done, that's not reflective of their entire life, it's not reflective of this interaction with you right now, here today, right? And that your interaction with them may be very similar to an interaction you might have with somebody who didn't commit these terrible crimes, right? And if that was somebody else who was doing those same irritating things, your reaction might not be as strong. And that's, I think, what you want to work on, is to where someone annoying at the front desk who may have done something terrible doesn't invoke any more of a visceral reaction than somebody annoying that you might run into at the grocery store. Does that make sense? Without letting the safety stuff down, right? Just because, I get to know the goodness of somebody, right, and I'm visiting with them in some sort of setting, I never compromise the safety factors. It's not like, well, I really know this guy now, so I'm not going to, make sure I'm sitting close to the door and that the guard's close by, right? I'm not going to change that. Even though I'm learning all these wonderful things about this person, I'm learning to care for them, right? Because the fact of the matter is, this is what they're capable of. But I don't let that be an emotional response. I let that be a rational response, where it's informing my decision making rather than commanding it. It's a hard concept, I know, but everybody's got this look like, yeah, I sort of get what you're talking about. I'm starting to think about what's happening. Yes, please.
So we started talking about transference and countertransference, and we talked about using mindfulness to be aware that what our impressions are might have something to do with how we learn. And then we've talked also a lot about secondary trauma that we all experience because of the work that we do. And mindfulness can also how to work through those. So now I'm just trying to, those two fit together somehow, I'm just trying to put those pieces, those three together for me.
Okay. So I think it's all the same stuff. What she's talking about is transference and countertransference. That she has these triggers and these feelings and these emotions that arise, and she doesn't quite know what to do with them. Okay. Bob's question, I think, has a lot to do with transference and countertransference, okay? He builds this relationship with somebody. He starts to see them more as a friend than a client, and then starts to take on more of those roles. And that, in that respect, when it goes south, it hurts because over time, that relationship has become more reflective of different relationships than Bob has, other than the relationships he has with his clients, typically, right? We carry those emotions. So I think they intertwine.
So secondary trauma is not necessarily because of something that happened to you in the past, but just because it's crap that you have to deal with.
Correct. Correct. So the secondary traumas may not be from past stuff. It can be what they're experiencing. Someone was there? So they're twitching. We can take another question. We can wrap up. Whatever you want to do. Anyone else? I think we had till 3, but I'm not opposed to letting you guys go early if you guys are spent. Okay, one last one. The rest of you went.
I'm sorry. I'm the judge over 2 re-entry courts.
Yes, ma'am.
So, following up on Bob's circumstance, and I've realized after this discussion all the things that I did wrong to get myself in this position. But at one of our social events before Christmas, there was a woman who we knew was actively psychotic. But she wanted to talk to me. I went with her out in the hallway, and because she was so agitated, here again, I didn't do it right. I reached over to touch her shoulder.
Not a good idea.
Not a good idea. And I thought she was going to hurt me. She was that upset, and the only thing I could think to do was to pull poor Mariska into this.
Well, I'm bigger.
Well, but when you encounter something like that, discounting all my mistakes,
Okay.
how would you handle it?
If you've already got yourself in the situation, safety.
Yeah.
Okay, so lesson number 1. Anyone who is psychotic you need to think that they will respond like a tiger, because that is how their brain is functioning, okay? So they are going to be very primal, very instinctual, very defense-oriented, okay? So remove the judgment, okay? They can be great when they're not psychotic, but when they're psychotic, you need to think of them like a tiger, and they will bite, okay? I had this ridiculous experience one time with a third-year medical student who was a cocky, narcissist little piece of work. And he learned an important, valuable lesson one day when he thought that someone who was mute and very psychotic was malingering. And he got in his face, and he's like, "What? They can't hear you." And I said, "He is going to get you." And he kept doing it, and the guy popped back and nailed him. And I was like, "Well, you learned, didn't you?" You know? And they function on a very primal brain. And if it's somebody you know well, don't be duped, because what you're seeing in a psychotic person is not the person you know. That brain is functioning completely differently. So, and don't take it personal, because it's not personal. And when you get hit, don't take it personal, because they wouldn't have done that ordinarily. So we had a gal just recently who, the healthcare at the Salt Lake County Jail is a nightmare, mental health care. Anyway, they had this lady very, very psychotic over there for 2 weeks. Took her to court. They should have never taken somebody that sick to court. She was really sick. And they go, she's very psychotic, she's getting searched before she goes in the courtroom. She's got bad PTSD to boot, and she says, "I need a female on guard." They say, "We don't have one today, face the wall." And she said, "Don't touch me." And he said, "Face the wall." What he should have said is, "You're going to have to go back." That should be the end of it. So no, he gets kneed in the nuts, and she gets a bunch of charges added onto her charge, right? Which is sad, because it's like, that was completely predictable for somebody that knows how psychotic behavior goes. And she told you, "Don't touch me," right? So just avoid that situation, don't take it personal, and recognize that their brain in that state is not the brain when they're not in that state. Because you meet this person 3 days later after she gets antipsychotics in her, and she is just sweet as sweet can be.
Not this one.
Not this one, not this one. All right. Well, let's wrap up. I'm going to turn this off because it's really, well, it's doing something. Thank you so much for coming and giving your attention today. I hope I was somewhat helpful. I think more than anything, it's just, this is stuff that needs practice, it needs time. These conversations, like in the group setting, when these things happen, I strongly encourage them. They're very, very helpful. It helps validate what you're feeling. It helps it process, it helps it heal. And it helps you not lose the humanity for why you came in this in the first place. And not having those conversations can lead us to getting hardened and cynical and not helpful to the population that we serve. Thank you.